a tariff will always help someone and harm someone. And it's going to harm people disproportionately, just depending on who they are.
Tariffs are kind of all the talk. Let's kind of start with the basics and then expand a little bit. So a tariff is what?
Okay, so a tariff, you'll hear people say a tariff is a tax. So I would actually like to start by talking about what a tax is and then talk about how a tariff differs from a tax. So what I tell my students is when you walk into a grocery store and you buy something, the price that you pay as the purchaser is going to be different than the price that the firm gets to take home at the end of the day. So I'm going to pay a higher price. The firm's going to bring home a lower price, and that difference is getting paid to the government. So that's a tax, and that, we tax things domestically all the time. So we're kind of splitting that tax. And I think that's really important because oftentimes we think about, oh, the government is taxing the firms, right? Or the government is taxing the consumers, or the government is putting a tax on Canada. And it's not exactly how that works, because what tends to happen is that paying that tax gets split between the buyers and the sellers.
That's a tax, but not a tariff.
That's just a tax. So then if I think about a tariff, how does this look when we're talking about sort of a tax on international imports? A similar thing is going to happen, except so we put a tariff, let's say on Canadian imports, Chinese imports, Mexican imports, and the price that I, as a domestic consumer, pay is going to go up. Now, so I am paying, as a US consumer, I'm going to pay some of that tariff that the government is imposing. It is also true that this will harm the country that's exporting to us, because they will also be paying part of that tariff, but not all of it. Now, what happens though is if I'm in the United States and I'm looking at, pens or, so I'm looking at buying a red pen, and there's a tariff on red pens now. And so the price of imported red pens has gone up. What will also happen is that domestically produced red pens also have this higher price. So when we're thinking about, well, why would tariffs get put into place? There's a couple reasons. So one would be we want to raise tax revenue. Maybe I want to punish another country for a variety of reasons. There's a whole bunch of political reasons one might want to do that. And then the third reason is what we think of as a protectionist policy. So if I want to help my red pen producers in the United States make a higher profit, when I impose this tariff, I'm increasing the price that they can sell at domestically. So when we think about steel tariffs, for example, that's helping steel producers in the US because they also get to charge this higher price.
So it makes them more competitive by raising the price that would otherwise be lower. It doesn't lower the price domestically.
It does not lower the price domestically, no. So if we're thinking about, all of the produce that we import from Mexico, if we put a tariff on these imports, then the price that we pay domestically will go up. So basically what happened is prior to World War II, all countries had very high tariffs. And post-World War II, there was this sort of communal decision made to reduce tariffs in order to increase global trade. And there's a lot of reasons that we like sort of this move towards free trade. Free trade meaning that there aren't any tariffs. So the more trade we have, the more access to goods we would have that we couldn't otherwise have. There are some rules put into place about when you're allowed to impose tariffs or sort of more tariffs on other countries. And so, for example, in our trade with Canada and Mexico, we are allowed to put higher tariffs in place if there's essentially a state of emergency, if we think that there's issues with protection to our country. Deciding that we want to reduce, let's say, drugs, the flow of drugs into the country could count as an emergency situation, which could allow the United States to sort of legally put added tariffs on our imports.
So when you heard about the most recent tariffs, and we're recording this on March 10th, and use recent however you want to use recent, what was kind of your reaction to it?
So the recent tariffs, what's been very interesting about it is that depending on the day, we don't know if they're going to happen or not. So there's this sort of stability question that's being called into play in a way that hasn't been before. So it's one thing to say, hey, we're going to impose 10% tariffs and then we're just off and running for a certain reason. But to say the tariffs are coming, okay, we'll cancel them for now. Okay, they're coming. It's that sort of on and off again that can actually lead to some of these price increases and stability issues that the tariffs themselves might cause. So even though maybe these 25% tariffs aren't in play right now, the on again, off again nature can create some of the exact same issues that the tariffs themselves would cause.
I could see that, because even what the little I know about business, like if I don't know what something is going to be, I'm going to plan for the highest and then budget accordingly.
Or you're going to look for different trading partners.
So I guess, for me sitting here, right, like this sounds like a bad thing.
For U.S. consumers?
Yeah. For me, it sounds like a bad thing. But what's the reason that could potentially, why would this be a good thing for me potentially?
I'm not sure that I could tell a good story about why it would be a good thing for a U.S. consumer. It could, in theory, be good for some U.S. producers. So if we're coming back to those protectionist policies and trying to prop up domestic production, I think steel and aluminum could benefit from these tariffs. But even if we think about car manufacturing, for instance, because I think sometimes we have sort of these old-fashioned stories that we're completely producing cars in the United States. And so if we put a tariff on imported automobiles, that's going to benefit automobile makers in the United States. And unfortunately, even that's not quite so straightforward, which is why they actually got really upset by the tariffs with Mexico and had the initial delay. Most goods that are produced nowadays, and cars are a really great example of this, have a lot of sort of back and forth across the borders. So even a car that's assembled in the United States might have had its engine and its steering wheel come from Mexico. Or it could be that a lot of the parts are produced in the United States and the car is assembled in Mexico. But essentially, in the last 30 years, there's been a huge growth in trade in the intermediate inputs. And so as those get more expensive, the manufacturers also get harmed. Even if you're assembling the car in the United States, you're using more expensive intermediate parts.
Is it going to be a situation, as it's currently kind of construed, that the rich get richer and the poor get poorer?
So if you think about the question, right, what we'd have to look for is where are the policies to help reallocate the wealth or the distribution gains? And if I don't see the policies to help the people who are being harmed,